The lights are bright, the crowd is cheering, and the table is piled high with food. What could go wrong at an eating competition? Everything. While America has long celebrated competitive eating as a quirky tradition, from 4th of July hot dog contests to county fair pie eating championships, the dark reality behind this spectacle is far more disturbing than most people realize. Between the laughter and applause, there lurks a genuine threat that has claimed multiple lives across the United States, transforming moments of entertainment into scenes of unimaginable tragedy. Competitive eating might seem like harmless fun, an amusing display of human endurance and appetite that draws crowds and generates social media buzz. Yet beneath the surface of this seemingly innocent pastime lies a lethal combination of biological risks: airway obstruction, oxygen deprivation, stomach rupture, water intoxication, and catastrophic organ failure. Medical professionals have repeatedly warned about the dangers, pointing to choking as the leading cause of death in these events, which ranks as the 4th leading cause of unintentional injury death in America. Professional competitive eaters face long-term health consequences including gastroparesis, morbid obesity, and potential stomach perforation, but it's the amateur contestants, the weekend warriors seeking a moment of glory or a free prize, who face the most immediate and deadly risks. The stories you're about to hear are not fabricated for shock value. They are real accounts of real people who entered eating competitions with excitement and left in body bags or on stretchers bound for morgues. These 5 unbelievable deaths share common threads: participants who underestimated the danger, venues that lacked proper medical supervision, and tragic outcomes that devastated families and communities. From baseball stadiums to donut shops, from charity fundraisers to late-night challenges, these fatal incidents expose the brutal truth that when eating becomes a competition, the stakes can be life or death. What begins as entertainment can end in asphyxiation, brain damage, and permanent silence. Each case reveals how quickly celebration can turn to catastrophe, how seconds can separate triumph from tragedy, and how the human body, pushed beyond its natural limits, can fail in the most horrifying ways imaginable. These are the stories of 5 Americans who died doing something that should never be dangerous: eating. Their deaths serve as chilling reminders that competitive eating is not a game, it's a potentially self-destructive form of behavior that can end in death. August 13, 2019, started like any other summer evening at Chukchansi Park in Fresno, California. The Fresno Grizzlies, a minor league baseball team, were hosting the Memphis Redbirds in what promised to be an exciting matchup. But the real draw for many fans that night wasn't the baseball, it was Taco Tuesday, a beloved promotional event that had become a stadium tradition. Between innings, the announcer's voice boomed across the ballpark, inviting fans to participate in an amateur taco eating contest as a teaser for the upcoming 9th annual taco truck throwdown scheduled for that Saturday. The prize wasn't extravagant, but the chance to be in the spotlight, to hear the crowd roar, to prove you could out-eat the competition, that was enough to draw several volunteers from the stands. Among those who eagerly raised their hands was Dana Hutchings, a 41-year-old father of 3 from Fresno. Described by his family as a devoted father who was there for his children 24/7, Dana was the kind of man who embraced life's simple pleasures and wasn't afraid to have a little fun. His daughter, Gabby Perez, would later remember him as someone who always showed up, always cared, always made them laugh. That night, Dana saw the taco eating contest as nothing more than a bit of entertainment, a chance to make memories, perhaps win a small prize, and give his family something to talk about at the dinner table. He had no way of knowing that these would be the last tacos he would ever taste, the last crowd he would ever hear, the last moments of his life. As the contest began, Dana and 2 other competitors sat at a table on the field, surrounded by stadium staff and cheered on by thousands of spectators. The rules were simple: eat as many tacos as you could, as quickly as possible. There was no mention of safety protocols, no emergency medical technicians specifically assigned to monitor the contestants, no discussion of the choking hazards inherent in speed eating competitions. The crowd roared with approval as the contestants dug in, their hands moving frantically from plate to mouth in a blur of tortillas, meat, cheese, and salsa. Matthew Boylan, a witness in the stands, noticed something alarming almost immediately. Dana was eating much more quickly than the other two contestants, his jaw barely moving, his throat working overtime to swallow massive chunks of food that he hadn't properly chewed. Approximately 7 minutes into the contest, disaster struck. Dana's face went from flushed with exertion to pale with panic. He began to cough, then gasp, his hands flying to his throat in the universal sign of choking. Before anyone could react, he collapsed forward, his face slamming into the table with a sickening thud that echoed through the suddenly silent section of the stadium. Then he fell sideways and hit the ground, his body convulsing as his brain screamed for oxygen that couldn't reach his lungs. The eating contest ended immediately, the festive atmosphere evaporating in an instant as the reality of what was happening sank in. Medical staff at the Grizzlies stadium rushed to Dana's side, their training kicking in as they initiated the Heimlich maneuver. They worked frantically, positioning themselves behind him, thrusting upward beneath his ribcage, trying desperately to dislodge whatever was blocking his airway. But the food was lodged too deeply, too firmly compacted in his throat and esophagus. When the Heimlich failed, they moved to CPR, pumping his chest, forcing air into his lungs, doing everything they could to keep him alive until paramedics arrived. The crowd watched in horror, the joyful cheers replaced by gasps and sobs. Children were ushered away, families held each other, and everyone in that stadium understood they were witnessing something terrible unfold. When the ambulance arrived, paramedics took over, continuing resuscitation efforts as they loaded Dana onto a stretcher and rushed him to Community Regional Medical Center. In the emergency room, doctors fought to save his life, working to clear his airway of the massive obstruction of food that had sealed his fate. They suctioned, they intubated, they tried everything in their medical arsenal. But the damage had been done. The lack of oxygen, the minutes that had passed while his brain was starved of the air it needed to function, it was too much. Dana Hutchings was pronounced dead at the hospital, leaving behind a devastated family and a community in shock. The Fresno County Coroner's Office conducted an autopsy on August 15, 2 days after the tragedy. The findings were as straightforward as they were heartbreaking. Dana had died from choking. The official cause of death was asphyxiation due to airway obstruction. Tony Body, spokesman for the Fresno County Sheriff's Office, released a statement that captured the senselessness of the loss. "It's just very sad." The family, struggling to process their grief, set up a fundraiser to cover funeral expenses, reaching out to a community that had witnessed their loved one's final moments. Dana's son would later file a lawsuit against the Fresno Grizzlies ownership, alleging that the organizers had failed to provide adequate safety measures and medical supervision for an event that should never have been held without proper precautions. The tragedy at Chukchansi Park that Taco Tuesday exposed the dangerous gap between entertainment and safety in amateur eating competitions. Dana Hutchings wasn't a professional competitive eater trained in techniques to manage large volumes of food. He was an ordinary man, a loving father, who thought he was participating in harmless fun at a baseball game. Instead, he became a cautionary tale, a statistic in the growing list of deaths associated with speed eating contests. His death forced the Fresno Grizzlies to cancel future eating competitions and sparked conversations about whether sporting venues have a moral and legal obligation to ensure that promotional events don't put participants at deadly risk. For Dana's family, no amount of discussion or policy change could bring him back. The man who had been there for them 24/7 was gone, his life cut short by tacos consumed too quickly in pursuit of a fleeting moment of glory. If Dana Hutchings' death at a baseball stadium was tragic, what happened to Edward Archbold in October 2012 was the stuff of nightmares. The setting was Ben Siegel Reptiles, a specialty pet store in Deerfield Beach, Florida, known for its exotic animals and unconventional promotional events. On a Friday night, the store hosted Midnight Madness, a contest that pushed the boundaries of what people would do for a prize. The challenge was grotesque by any standard. Participants would compete to see who could consume the most live roaches and worms. The reward for the winner was an $850 python, a prize valuable enough to attract between 20 and 30 competitors willing to subject themselves to this stomach-churning ordeal. Among the crowd of contestants was Edward Archbold, a 32-year-old man from West Palm Beach. Friends and witnesses would later describe Edward as the life of the party that night, someone who threw himself into the competition with enthusiasm and showmanship. The store owner, Ben Siegel, told CNN affiliate WLG that Edward really made our night more enjoyable, entertaining the crowd with his fearless consumption of insects and worms. He wasn't just participating, he was performing, turning the disgusting act of eating live roaches into a spectacle that had people laughing, cheering, and cringing in equal measure. Edward attacked the challenge with gusto, his hands grabbing handfuls of cockroaches, shoving them into his mouth, chewing frantically, and swallowing them down before reaching for more. The competition was intense, with participants racing against each other to see who could stomach the most bugs in the shortest amount of time. Edward was relentless. Roach after roach disappeared into his mouth, followed by squirming worms that many spectators couldn't even bear to watch. While the store didn't release exact numbers, it was clear to everyone present that Edward had consumed an enormous quantity of insects, far more than most of the other competitors could manage. His determination paid off. Edward Archbold was declared the winner of Midnight Madness, earning himself the coveted python and the admiration of the crowd. For a brief moment, he was a champion, the man who had out-eaten everyone else in one of the most bizarre contests imaginable. But victory would be short-lived. Shortly after the contest ended, Edward began to feel ill. His stomach, filled with dozens upon dozens of roaches and worms, started to rebel against what he had forced into it. He began vomiting violently, his body desperately trying to purge itself of the insect mass that filled his digestive system. Friends noticed his distress and called for medical help. Edward himself was aware enough of the severity of his condition to dial 911, according to a Facebook post later shared by the store. But before help could arrive, his condition deteriorated rapidly. Outside the reptile store, with the sounds of the Midnight Madness contest still echoing in the background, Edward collapsed. Paramedics rushed to the scene and immediately transported Edward to North Broward Medical Center. By the time they arrived at the hospital, it was too late. Edward Archbold was pronounced dead, his life ending in the most unimaginable way, killed by the very insects he had consumed to win a snake. The Broward County Sheriff's Office launched an investigation, and authorities waited for autopsy results to determine the official cause of death. What they found was as horrifying as it was revealing. On November 26, 2012, more than a month after Edward's death, the Broward County Medical Examiner's Office released its findings. The cause of death was asphyxia due to choking. The report specified that the choking was caused by gastric contents, meaning that pieces of the roaches and worms Edward had consumed had obstructed his airway. The insects, either regurgitated during his vomiting or never properly swallowed in the first place, had blocked the passage of air to his lungs, suffocating him from the inside. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, but the circumstances were anything but simple. Edward Archbold had essentially choked on the body parts of the insects he had eaten, his airway clogged with the chitinous exoskeletons and soft bodies of roaches and worms. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the competitive eating community and beyond. Edward's death highlighted the extreme risks of not just speed eating competitions, but contests that involve consuming non-traditional or potentially dangerous substances. Roaches and worms, while not poisonous, are not meant to be consumed in large quantities, especially live. Their bodies can clump together, creating blockages in the throat and digestive system. The vomiting that Edward experienced was his body's natural response to an overload it couldn't process, but that very response, combined with the nature of what he had eaten, created the perfect storm for asphyxiation. Remarkably, none of the other contestants experienced any health issues, according to the sheriff's office. Edward was the only one whose participation in Midnight Madness proved fatal, a fact that makes his death even more haunting. For Edward's family and friends, the loss was incomprehensible. A man in his early 30s, full of life and energy, had died because of a contest at a pet store. The python he won would outlive him by decades. The laughter and entertainment of that Friday night had been replaced by grief, shock, and the terrible knowledge that Edward's final moments were spent choking on insects while his body shut down. His death became one of the most publicized examples of competitive eating gone wrong, a case study in how far people will go for a prize and how quickly fun can turn fatal. Edward Archbold's story is a reminder that some competitions should never be held, some challenges should never be attempted, and some prices are simply too high to pay, even for an $850 python. Some tragedies carry layers of heartbreak that compound the loss, making the pain almost unbearable for those left behind. The death of Caitlin Nelson in March 2017 was one of those tragedies, a 20-year-old college student whose life was cut short during a charity event and whose family had already endured unimaginable loss years earlier. Caitlin was a social work major at Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut, a young woman dedicated to helping others and making a difference in the world. She was also the daughter of James Nelson, a Port Authority police officer who died on September 11, 2001, while helping people evacuate from the 72nd floor of one of the Twin Towers. Caitlin had been only 5 years old when her father was killed in the terrorist attacks, and she had grown up carrying the weight of that loss while honoring his memory through her own commitment to service. On March 30, 2017, Caitlin decided to participate in a pancake eating contest organized by the Delta 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 sorority as part of Sacred Heart University's annual Greek Week celebration. The contest was held at an off-campus home and was intended to raise funds for Prevent Child Abuse America, a cause that aligned perfectly with Caitlin's social work studies and her desire to help vulnerable populations. To Caitlin and many other students, it seemed like a fun, harmless way to support a good cause, eating pancakes in a friendly competition surrounded by friends and fellow students. What could possibly go wrong? The contest began with excitement and laughter, participants digging into stacks of thick, fluffy pancakes. Caitlin consumed several pancakes, later reports indicated 4 or 5, working her way through the dense, doughy food as quickly as she could. But minutes into the competition, something went terribly wrong. Witnesses reported that Caitlin suddenly began to shake uncontrollably, her body convulsing as she struggled to breathe. The laughter died instantly as people realized she was choking. Caitlin's face turned pale, then blue, as oxygen failed to reach her brain. She collapsed, her body going limp as she fell unconscious. Emergency services were called immediately, and fortunately, there were 2 nursing students present at the event who rushed to Caitlin's aid. They attempted to clear her airway and began life-saving measures while waiting for professional help to arrive. Fairfield police officers and paramedics responded quickly, continuing the desperate efforts to save Caitlin's life. When they examined her, the situation became horrifyingly clear. Pancakes were lodged almost to her teeth, and a massive glob of pancake paste was blocking her airway deep in her throat. Despite their training and equipment, emergency responders struggled to clear the obstruction. The thick, sticky nature of pancakes, especially when consumed rapidly without proper chewing, had created a deadly plug that sealed off her breathing passage. Caitlin was rushed to Columbia University Medical Center in New York, but the damage had already been done. The prolonged lack of oxygen had caused catastrophic brain damage. Fairfield Police Chief Gary McNamara later told reporters, "The lack of oxygen for that extended period of time caused irreversible damage, making it not survivable." Caitlin remained in the hospital for 3 days, her family keeping vigil at her bedside, hoping against hope for a miracle that would never come. On April 2, 2017, Caitlin Nelson was taken off life support and died, her official cause of death ruled as asphyxiation by choking. The Nelson family's grief was compounded by the cruel echo of history. Roseanne Nelson, Caitlin's mother, had already lost her husband in one of America's most devastating tragedies. Now, 16 years later, she had lost her daughter in an equally senseless incident, a college charity event that should have been safe, that should have been joyful, that should have sent Caitlin home with stories to tell, not to the morgue. The double tragedy that befell the Nelson family became national news, with media outlets highlighting the heartbreaking connection between Caitlin's father's heroic death on 9/11 and her own death in a pancake eating contest. In June 2018, more than a year after Caitlin's death, Roseanne Nelson filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Sacred Heart University in Superior Court in Bridgeport, Connecticut. The lawsuit alleged that the university had failed to properly investigate the safety of the pancake eating contest before granting approval for the event. It claimed that Sacred Heart did not have adequate and appropriate medical personnel on site who could respond effectively to a choking incident. The suit further alleged that concerns had been raised about the dangers of consuming thick pancakes rapidly, but that the university had allowed the event to proceed anyway. The Nelson family sought damages in excess of $15,000, though no amount of money could ever compensate for the loss of Caitlin. Fairfield Police Lieutenant Bob Calamara captured the senseless nature of the tragedy when he described the event as something that started out as fun but became a tragic event. Caitlin Nelson had known about the risks of food. She had multiple documented food allergies and was presumably more aware than most about being careful with what she ate. But in the excitement and camaraderie of a college charity event, surrounded by friends and competing for a good cause, those cautions were forgotten or overlooked. The thick, sticky pancakes became weapons, lodging in her throat and stealing her breath in a matter of seconds. Caitlin's death serves as a painful reminder that even events with the best intentions, fundraisers for children's charities, Greek Week celebrations, community-building activities, can turn deadly when they involve speed-eating competitions. For the Nelson family, the tragedy was compounded by layers of loss. The knowledge that Caitlin, who had dedicated her life to social work and helping others after losing her father in an act of terrorism, died trying to raise money for abused children. The cruel irony was not lost on anyone who knew her story. Denver, Colorado, is known for many things: stunning mountain views, craft breweries, a vibrant art scene, and yes, Voodoo Doughnut, a Portland-based donut shop that has achieved cult status for its over-the-top, diabetes-inducing creations. The Denver location of Voodoo Doughnut on Colfax Avenue was no exception, drawing crowds with its nostalgia-heavy fried dough concoctions decorated with cereal, candy, and enough sugar to send anyone into a coma. Part of Voodoo's appeal was its willingness to embrace the outrageous, and that included promotional eating competitions designed to test the limits of human consumption. One such challenge was the Texas Donut Challenge, a competition that epitomized everything extreme about Voodoo Doughnut's brand. The Texas Challenge was simple in concept but brutal in execution. For a $4.50 entry fee, contestants were given exactly 80 seconds to consume an entire Texas donut, a standard glazed donut that was, quite literally, the size of a human head. This massive confection weighed 1/2 pound of pure fried dough and sugar, a caloric monstrosity that would challenge even the most experienced competitive eaters. If a contestant succeeded in finishing the entire donut within the time limit, they would receive a refund of their entry fee and the bragging rights that came with conquering one of Voodoo's most infamous challenges. Sounds like fun, right? For most people who attempted it, the Texas Challenge was just that, a memorable, stomach-stretching experience that made for great photos and stories. But for Travis Malouf, it would be his last meal. In the early morning hours of April 2, 2017, just one day before Caitlin Nelson's death in Connecticut, Travis Malouf, a 42-year-old Colorado man, entered the Voodoo Doughnut location on Colfax Avenue around 1 a.m. He paid his entry fee and accepted his Texas donut, a glazed behemoth that likely weighed more than many people's breakfast, lunch, and dinner combined. The clock started, and Travis began eating. Those 80 seconds must have felt like an eternity as he forced massive bites of fried dough into his mouth, barely chewing, desperately trying to swallow fast enough to beat the timer. The donut was dense, sticky, and enormous, each bite a challenge to his jaw, his throat, his stomach. Somewhere in those frantic 80 seconds, disaster struck. Travis began to choke. The massive chunks of donut, insufficiently chewed and swallowed too quickly, lodged in his throat and blocked his airway. Unlike a restaurant or organized competition venue, the late-night Voodoo Doughnut location was not staffed with medical professionals or emergency personnel trained to respond to choking incidents. Travis's friends, realizing what was happening, attempted to perform the Heimlich maneuver, positioning themselves behind him and thrusting upward beneath his ribcage, trying desperately to dislodge the obstruction. But their efforts were unsuccessful. The donut remained lodged in his airway, and with each passing second, Travis's brain was deprived of the oxygen it needed to survive. Someone called 911, and paramedics were dispatched to the Voodoo Doughnut location with reports of a man choking. When they arrived, They found Travis in the lobby of the shop, collapsed and unresponsive. Despite their immediate intervention and attempts at resuscitation, there was nothing they could do. Travis Malouf was pronounced dead at the scene. The Denver office of the medical examiner later confirmed the cause of death: asphyxia due to obstruction of the airway. A man had died in a donut shop, killed by the very food he was trying to consume for a challenge that would have earned him back his $4.50 entry fee. The timing of Travis's death was particularly eerie. His choking incident occurred on April 2nd, and he died in the early morning hours of that day. Less than 24 hours later, Caitlin Nelson would choke and collapse during her pancake eating contest in Connecticut, dying days later in the hospital. 2 competitive eating-related deaths in a single weekend shocked the nation and forced uncomfortable conversations about the safety and morality of these events. Media outlets picked up both stories, highlighting the dangerous trend of eating competitions and the frequency with which participants were choking, being hospitalized, or dying. Voodoo Doughnut, faced with the public relations nightmare of having a customer die during one of their challenges, issued a statement on the evening of April 3rd. "Our hearts go out to the Malouf family during this very difficult time," the statement read. "We have suspended the eating challenge in all our locations. While this matter is under investigation, we believe it would be inappropriate to comment further." The Texas Donut Challenge, which had been a staple of Voodoo's promotional activities, was immediately canceled across all Voodoo Donut locations worldwide. What had once been seen as a fun, quirky challenge that fit perfectly with the company's irreverent brand image was now a liability, a potentially deadly activity that had cost a man his life. Travis Malouf's death raised serious questions about the responsibility of restaurants and businesses that host eating competitions. Unlike sanctioned competitive eating events organized by groups like Major League Eating, which have trained medical personnel on site and participants who sign extensive waivers acknowledging the risks, the Voodoo Doughnut Challenge was informal, unsupervised, and open to anyone willing to pay the entry fee. There was no screening process to ensure participants understood the dangers, no medical staff standing by in case of emergency, and no protocols in place for dealing with choking incidents. The challenge relied on customers' common sense and self-preservation instincts, assumptions that proved tragically inadequate in Travis's case. In the aftermath of Travis's death, advocates called for restaurants to train their employees in CPR and the Heimlich maneuver to prevent similar tragedies. Local news outlets in Denver promoted free classes in first aid and choking rescue techniques, hoping to equip more people with the skills needed to save lives in emergency situations. But for the Malouf family, no amount of training or policy changes could bring Travis back. A 42-year-old man had died in the lobby of a donut shop, his airway blocked by fried dough and sugar, his final moments spent gasping for air that couldn't reach his lungs. The Texas Donut Challenge had claimed its first and last victim, a man whose name would forever be associated with the deadly risks of competitive eating. While most eating competition deaths result from choking, there exists another, lesser-known danger that is equally deadly: water intoxication. This form of death is particularly insidious because water seems harmless. We're constantly told to hydrate, to drink more water, to keep our bodies properly supplied with fluids. But what happens when hydration becomes a competition? What happens when the body is forced to consume far more water than it can safely process? The answer is hyponatremia, a condition where the body's sodium levels fall dangerously low, causing the brain to swell, push against the skull, and ultimately shut down. This is exactly what killed Jennifer Strange, a 28-year-old mother of 3, in one of the most disturbing eating competition deaths ever recorded in the United States. On January 17, 2007, Jennifer Strange was one of 18 people who entered a radio contest called Hold Your Wii for a Wii. The contest was sponsored by KDND 1079, The End, a Sacramento radio station, and the prize was a Nintendo Wii gaming console, a hot commodity at the time that was in short supply and high demand. The rules of the competition were simple but brutal. Contestants had to drink as much water as they could without urinating. The last person to hold their bladder would win the Wii. It sounded like a quirky, uncomfortable challenge that might cause some embarrassment and discomfort, but certainly not death. Radio DJs joked and laughed as contestants lined up to participate, treating the whole event as light-hearted entertainment. Jennifer Strange was motivated by love. She wanted to win the Nintendo Wii for her children, to give them something special that she otherwise couldn't afford. She was a devoted mother willing to endure discomfort for her kids' happiness. The contest took place over approximately 3 hours, during which Jennifer consumed nearly 2 gallons of water. That's roughly 16 8-ounce glasses of water, an enormous volume that far exceeds what the human body can safely process in such a short period. As the contest progressed, Jennifer began showing signs of distress. She complained about pain while on the air, her voice audible to the radio DJs and thousands of listeners tuning in. "Oh, it hurts," Strange said, her discomfort clear. But instead of stopping the contest or checking on her well-being, the DJs made jokes and laughed, treating her suffering as part of the entertainment. What makes Jennifer's death even more tragic is that multiple people tried to warn the radio station that the contest was dangerous. Listeners called in during the broadcast, including a nurse, to alert the DJs that drinking excessive amounts of water could lead to water intoxication and death. One listener, Eva Brooks, specifically said, "Those people that are drinking all that water can get sick and possibly die from water intoxication." The DJs acknowledged that they were aware of the risk but dismissed the warnings. They told callers that the station was not responsible because all contestants had signed release forms. The DJs did not warn Jennifer or the other contestants about the possibility of water intoxication or death. They simply continued with the competition, prioritizing entertainment and ratings over participant safety. After the contest ended, Jennifer's condition deteriorated rapidly. She called in sick to work, telling her employer that she wasn't feeling well and needed to go home. The pain she had complained about during the contest had intensified. Her body was struggling to cope with the massive influx of water that was diluting her bloodstream and causing her brain to swell. Water intoxication, also known as hyponatremia, occurs when excessive water consumption dilutes sodium levels in the blood below normal ranges. Sodium is crucial for maintaining proper cellular function, especially in the brain. When sodium levels drop too low, water moves into brain cells, causing them to swell. Because the brain is enclosed in the rigid skull, there is no room for expansion. The swelling brain pushes against the skull, creating pressure that leads to a cascade of symptoms: nausea, vomiting, weakness, headaches, confusion, seizures, coma, and ultimately death. Jennifer made it home, but the situation was critical. She went to her bathroom, likely experiencing the nausea and vomiting that accompany hyponatremia. Hours after the contest had ended, with her children somewhere in the house, Jennifer Strange died in her bathroom. The coroner ruled that her death was due to water intoxication, a completely preventable tragedy that should never have occurred. The news of her death sent shockwaves through Sacramento and beyond. A mother of 3 had died trying to win a video game console for her children, killed by something as seemingly innocuous as water. The aftermath of Jennifer's death was marked by legal action and public outrage. Her husband, Billy Strange, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the radio station and its parent company, Entercom Sacramento. The case went to trial, and in October 2009, a jury awarded the Strange family $16.5 million in damages. During the trial, shocking details emerged about the radio station's negligence. Juror Lateshia Paget noted that the contest had never been reviewed by the station's legal department, even though it was supposed to be submitted for legal review before being broadcast. The DJs and station management had proceeded with a contest that they knew, or should have known, was dangerous, ignoring warnings from listeners and medical professionals. The defense attempted to argue that Jennifer should have accepted some responsibility for knowing that drinking so much water was dangerous. But Jennifer's attorney, Roger Dreyer, countered that she had acted as any normal person would have in those circumstances. She trusted that the radio station, a professional media company, would not host a contest that could kill her. She trusted that when she signed the release form, it was standard legal protection for minor discomforts, not a waiver for life-threatening risks. And she trusted that if the contest became dangerous, someone would stop it. All of those assumptions proved tragically wrong. One of the most haunting aspects of Jennifer's final hours was captured in recordings from the contest. While she was dying, while her brain was swelling and her body was shutting down, Jennifer was talking about her children and showing videos of them to other contestants and station staff. She was excited about potentially winning the Wii for them, imagining their faces when she brought it home. She had no idea that she would never see them again, that her body was already in the process of fatal shutdown, that the water she had consumed was killing her from the inside. And perhaps most chilling of all, the DJs who knew she was at risk for dying did nothing. They didn't tell her, they didn't call for help, they didn't stop the contest. They just kept broadcasting, kept laughing, kept treating human suffering as entertainment. The question often asked in the aftermath was, why didn't the other contestants die? There are numerous variables that determine the outcome of water intoxication, including whether participants ate before, during, or after the contest, their electrolyte levels prior to consumption, their body size, and exactly how much water they consumed. Only one other contestant drank as much water as Jennifer, but that person survived, likely due to differences in one or more of these factors. Jennifer's particular physiology, combined with the specific circumstances of that day, created the perfect storm for fatal hyponatremia. Jennifer Strange's death stands apart from the other cases in this list because it wasn't food that killed her, it was water. Her tragedy exposes a different dimension of competitive consumption dangers, one where the substance being consumed is not just non-toxic but actually essential for life. Yet in excessive quantities, consumed too quickly, water becomes a poison as deadly as any other. Jennifer's story is a stark reminder that competitive eating and drinking events, regardless of what's being consumed, push the human body beyond its natural limits and can result in catastrophic failure of vital systems. For her 3 children, who lost their mother over a video game console, the tragedy is immeasurable. For the radio station, the $16.5 million judgment was a fraction of the price paid, Jennifer Strange's life, cut short by greed, negligence, and the dangerous belief that entertainment value outweighs human safety. The 5 deaths chronicled here: Dana Hutchings choking on tacos at a baseball game, Edward Archbold asphyxiating on roaches at a reptile store, Caitlin Nelson suffocating on pancakes at a charity event, Travis Malouf dying from a donut in a late-night challenge, and Jennifer Strange succumbing to water intoxication in a radio contest, represent just a fraction of the competitive eating fatalities that have occurred in the United States. Each case shares common elements: participants who underestimated the risks, venues that lacked proper medical supervision, and outcomes that devastated families and communities. Medical professionals have repeatedly warned that competitive eating is a potentially self-destructive form of behavior that can lead to choking, gastroparesis, stomach perforation, water intoxication, and death. Yet these contests continue, driven by the promise of prizes, the thrill of competition, and the viral potential of social media content. The tragedies detailed in this investigation reveal an uncomfortable truth: what we celebrate as entertainment can be lethal. Amateur eating competitions, in particular, pose extreme risks because participants lack the training and experience of professional competitive eaters, and venues often fail to implement adequate safety protocols. Choking remains the 4th leading cause of unintentional injury death in America, and eating competitions create the perfect conditions for choking incidents: rapid consumption, minimal chewing, distraction, peer pressure, and the excitement of competition. For every person who walks away from an eating contest with a prize and a funny story, there are others who leave in ambulances or body bags, their lives forever altered or ended by what was supposed to be harmless fun. These 5 deaths serve as warnings that should not be ignored. Dana Hutchings, Edward Archbold, Caitlin Nelson, Travis Malouf, and Jennifer Strange were real people with families who loved them, futures that were stolen, and stories that ended far too soon. They weren't professional eaters taking calculated risks. They were ordinary Americans who thought they were participating in safe events. Their deaths expose the deadly gap between perception and reality in competitive eating, the failure of venues to prioritize safety over spectacle, and the urgent need for regulation and oversight in an industry that continues to claim lives. Until fundamental changes are made, until safety becomes paramount, until the risks are properly communicated and medical supervision is mandated, more people will die in eating competitions. And each death will be as preventable, as tragic, and as unbelievable as the 5 you've just learned about.